Religious trauma makes everything harder. And the worst part is sometimes it's really hard to tell all the different ways religious trauma impacts you. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about how religious trauma is impacting me, just to give you a little bit of insight into what it really looks like to have religious trauma and to heal religious trauma. Hey everyone, it's Mav and this is Mav Magic, and on this channel I like to help people find their truth and find their magic. If you are interested in hearing a little bit more about non-binary identity, spirituality, and anything else I want to talk about, I would definitely invite you to subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. And if you do enjoy this video, go ahead and give it a like. Make sure you share it with people as well. I also really love to hear your thoughts and opinions. So if you are dealing with a religious trauma, maybe you're not sure if you're dealing with religious trauma, just share your experiences in the comments below, and I would love to have a conversation with you. So I want to start making a lot more content about religious trauma, but I know that I just have to kind of like get a bunch of my thoughts out first, just to kind of introduce the topic in general on this channel and talk to you about my experiences with it and pretty much how I'm learning to deal with it a little bit. I'm not going to get into too much of the healing process in this video. I'm mostly going to be talking about my experiences, and then I'll make a full-length video all about healing religious trauma in the future. Probably one of the biggest tips that I can give anyone who's learning how to heal religious trauma is to really allow themselves to feel all the intensity of the emotions that they're going through. And one of the emotions that I didn't really expect to be feeling, but one that I'm noticing is really important in this process, is grief. Honestly, so much of religious trauma healing is learning how to feel and process grief. So there are a lot of things that I've lost because of the issues with religious trauma, and also like when I was leaving religion, there was a lot of things that I lost. So I'm going to share a little bit of that right now. One of the first things that I'm grieving is the loss of community in that religious circle. I lost tons of family and friends because I have kind of like left the religion. A lot of that also had to do with my queerness, which is really sad and upsetting. But having to realize that I'm really dealing with a lot of grief because I've lost so many important people in my life. And I think that one thing that's important is that sometimes people will say things like, yeah, like those people weren't really your people, so it's important just to let them go and live your life. And while that's important and very true, right, I think that it's important not to bypass a person's emotional experience, right? So like for me to not have contact with my parents and some of my siblings is really, really hard and really, really sad. So just saying like, oh, you're better off without them isn't really allowing that person to have a full emotional experience. So letting myself be sad about kind of like losing my parents and grieving the idea of connecting with my parents in the way that most people get to do is really hard for me. Things like my wedding, not really having family involved, not having a lot of family involved in my wedding, even though it was a small Zoom wedding, was sad, right? So there's a lot of ways that I'm kind of learning how to grieve and work through these emotions. The other thing that I lost when leaving my religion was security about my beliefs. I was a pretty staunch fundamentalist Christian, and I felt so secure in all of my beliefs. I was very confident in everything. I thought that I had everything right. But the way that I like to explain it to people is it feels like when you have these beliefs, it feels like you're walking on solid ground, right? You walk outside every day and you know that the ground is going to be there to support you and hold you, right? The ground I'm standing on my floor in the house, I don't expect it to just open up underneath me because I know that the ground is going to be there, right? That's how secure I was in my faith. Now imagine you're standing on the ground and it just opens up underneath you, right? That is a jarring experience. Imagine how that would change the way that you walked outside, right? After you have that experience, you're going to be scared when you're walking on the sidewalk because you're feeling insecure about your trust in the earth itself, right? So that is just an example of how it felt for me to lose confidence in all of my beliefs. It was ridiculously painful and left me feeling pretty overwhelmed and confused by all the possibilities out there in terms of what there is to believe. There are also a lot of things about my childhood that I feel a lot of grief about, things that I wasn't allowed to experience. My parents were also really strict, so that had, I think, a really big part to do with it as well. But one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is just the fact that there were a ton of gender roles that I was taught in my house, and there wasn't a lot of room for me to play around with gender, even wearing different articles of clothing, different things. Like, I didn't own a pair of pants until I was like 11 or 12. Because of my parents' beliefs about different articles of clothing and gender, right? And wearing pants was too masculine. And even the first pair of pants that I owned was like denim material, but it had a stretchy waistband. And I remember my mom telling me that was the only kind of pants that I could wear because the ones with a zipper on the front were too masculine. So I hope that this gives a little bit of insight into kind of all the weird gender stuff that I was taught when I was younger, and how I'm having to kind of weed through all of that now as an adult, and also doing the things that I want to do, right? This is the first time that I'm able to really like express myself in terms of gender, right? Since leaving that religion and kind of leaving my family and everything, which is really great. I still feel sad that I wasn't able to do that as a child and kind of explore those things when I was younger. I'm learning how to grieve my childhood in a lot of ways. A really big category of things that I'm grieving is basically all the things that I lost because of indoctrination, not being able to think for myself. I was not able to give consent for people to teach me those things and to kind of force me to believe these things, right? These were forced onto me. I had no choice in it, right? And that was really upsetting. A lot of my autonomy was lost in that indoctrination process. So a lot of me is kind of grieving my almost like innocence and kind of my freedom of mind, so to speak, because of indoctrination. Another aspect of indoctrination that really has impacted me and that I'm grieving right now is really being taught that I am inherently flawed and broken. That you come out of the womb a wretched sinner in need of a savior, in need of Christ. And while that message is a message of hope for some people, it taught me that I was broken inherently, and that like I didn't have a lot of value or a lot of worth inherently. And I think that it's very easy to understand why that would impact someone on a long-term basis. And so that is just a brief kind of consensus of a couple of the things that I'm learning how to kind of like grieve the loss of. And I know that there will be more things in the future. But yeah, that is just kind of a little bit of an example of those things. And now I want to talk a little bit about some of the other things that I'm noticing, some of the other ways. So now I want to talk about some of the other ways I'm noticing religious trauma impact me as an adult. So one of the biggest impacts, and I think very relevant impacts right now, is a crap ton of internalized homophobia and transphobia, just general queer phobia. I distinctly remember being taught kind of things about queer people and gay people, and how like wretched those people were to the people in my family, people in the churches that I went to. But it wasn't only kind of the in-church indoctrination that impacted me. A lot of it was stuff that I heard just in my home and in my family, the ways that I saw my parents respond to people who were queer. I remember distinctly actually seeing a person who my parents would have called a man in a dress back when I was really young, and how disgusted their faces were because of that. And so now as I'm like an adult trying to explore my queerness, I'm noticing a lot of that internalized hatred and disgust start to come up, right? And that is really messed up, right? The fact that these things are kind of ingrained into our system, they're ingrained into our minds. And the impact of that is so devastating for me. I'm over here just like trying to do my thing, trying to live my life, but then I have all of these kind of beliefs and things like that are kind of locked into my subconscious mind that are telling me messages about, like this isn't okay and different things like that, which is really frustrating and upsetting. And the other problem with that whole mindset is when you're a Christian, they tell you that those little messages that come up and tell you that those things are wrong are the Holy Spirit trying to keep you in line with Christ. So like all of this stuff, like you have a very kind of messed up way of thinking. You're very, very overly concerned about your thoughts in general. And I'll kind of touch on that when I talk about mental health later. The other impact that I'm noticing is that there is a lot of confusion around what to believe. So after you kind of realize, okay, like I'm not this religion anymore, I immediately jumped into kind of another spiritual frame of thinking. The idea of not having any type of belief system was pretty jarring to me. So I kind of very quickly jumped onto another train of thinking. And the other issue with this whole thing is that religious trauma oftentimes impacts and lessens your ability to think critically. And so I was just kind of like hearing a bunch of different beliefs and adopting a lot of them as my own without really doing any type of critical thinking at all. For example, you're told growing up that there is this person in the sky who created human beings out of dirt, and you have all these magical stories of walking on water and parting the Red Sea and healing the sick and people raising from the dead. So there's a ton of magical thinking that I've already had, and that is very easy for me to just kind of like hold on to. So then I hear other kind of spiritual beliefs that might be a little bit out there or outlandish, but I'm just kind of like, sure, anything can be real, right? I already believe that, someone like took an entire ocean, split it in half. Like, why not believe in X, Y, or Z thing? I can't think of any specific thoughts right now, but I hope that you can see how some of these things are impacted by my inability to think critically. The worst part about struggling with critical thinking and not having critical thinking skills is that I'm actually very susceptible to cults and mind control type groups, a lot of conspiracy theories and things like that. I can eat those things up because of my tendency towards magical thinking. And I really do want to quickly mention that cults can be really anything, just any type of high control group. So these can be things like multi-level marketing groups, different types of self-help kind of cults, or kind of psychology type of groups. And I want to be honest and share that I found myself kind of in the midst of this spiritual group that now I'm finding out is kind of cultish, and I did adopt some of those beliefs because of my inability to kind of critically think. And so what I'm doing right now to heal from that is learning a little bit obsessively about critical thinking, things like logical fallacies, a ton of epistemology, learning, that's the study of knowledge, just learning how people come to their own conclusions and learning how to challenge my own beliefs. So that's definitely a piece of advice here. If you are dealing with religious trauma, I implore you to research logical fallacies, how to adopt and learn how to critically think, and a bunch of things like that, because you need to learn how to challenge your beliefs. You need to learn how to challenge the things that are being told to you, because your filter might not be as pristine as others because of all the things that were allowed in before. I hope that all makes sense. And another thing that I'm noticing my religious trauma is impacting is my general overall mental health. There are a lot of ways that I've struggled with my emotional and mental health since I was in about high school. A lot of it had to do with my kind of chronic low self-esteem and self-hatred. Now I am really realizing that a lot of that stuff was ingrained into me through religious means. So like, you're not good because you're a sinner. It's normal that you feel bad about yourself because you're a sinner. And I had a really difficult time actually knowing where to find my worth, right? So at first, all of my worth and value was found in God. And so after leaving religion, I had to kind of start to figure out what it even looked like to feel valuable just without any of that. One of the main things that I'm realizing in my kind of discovery of my own mental health is that my sense of self-trust has been massively skewed. Ever since I've grown up, I was taught that the things that I believed, the things that kind of came up naturally within me, were not safe, were not to be trusted. If I kind of came up with something because it was my own opinion, that wouldn't be acceptable. I would have had to try to find a way to make it so that God was approving of what I was doing. And so my own ability to trust myself and my own opinions was pretty much gone, non-existent. It was kind of either towards God or towards other figures in authority, or like my dad. Those were the only really kind of sources of trust that I had. Internal trust wasn't really reliable. And I know that it's very easy to see how that can be impacting in your mental health. For me as an adult, it shows up with a lot of ruminative thinking, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of self-questioning, a lot of self-judgment on my own thoughts, kind of that idea of you kind of constantly policing yourself on a consistent basis. One of the other things with Christianity is that it's a religion that does condemn thought crime, so that if you think something inappropriate, that is just as sinful. So I noticed myself being very, very like policing over my thoughts, very like trying to make sure that the things that I'm thinking are good, right? And then who is the person that decides what thoughts are good or not, right? These things don't actually make any sense. And this is why I think some people call religion learned mental illness, right? You learn not to trust yourself, you learn not to trust your opinions, you kind of over obsess over your thoughts and things like that, and you can ruminate all day to kind of keep yourself in line, right? That's not a healthy mindset, but it's something that was ingrained into me that I'm learning how to get out of now. One of the other issues with kind of mental health and self-trust that I'm noticing is that my body really favors the fawn response. So if you know any of those kind of like nervous system activating response, you have fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. So what happens in the fawn response is like when a person is captured, instead of running away or fighting back, they just kind of surrender to that person that's captivated them. And it really was how I felt. Like I was trapped in my home. I couldn't leave. There was no way for me to get out of this system. And it was a very harmful place for my mental health, but I had to stay there and like make nice with the people who were harming me with their thoughts and with their rhetoric and things like that. So I had to play nice with the people who were doing harm to me. And that can mess you up in a lot of different ways. What that looks like right now is I find it very easy to kind of forsake my own thoughts and opinions for the opinions of others, especially people who position themselves as an authority figure. I have a much easier time kind of relinquishing my trust to someone else rather than trusting my own opinions, because it feels very, very high stakes, right? And that has caused a ton of problems for me as an adult, because I need to trust myself and my own opinions for a variety of things, but I've noticed myself kind of like letting go of some of that and letting other people run my life, which has ended very, very poorly. Really, right now, I'm in this phase of a lot of learning, a lot of patience with myself, a lot of understanding, at least trying to get to a place of understanding and trying to make some connections. I know that I've made a whole bunch of progress in my own healing of my religious trauma, but I know that I still have a long ways to go. And one thing that I'm really curious about is your experience. So are you dealing with religious trauma? Are you trying to heal from religious trauma? What are some of the things that you're trying to do to help yourself think more critically? What has it been like for you to adopt new belief systems and let go of old ones? And I also want to mention that it doesn't have to be just religious trauma. There's also spiritual trauma. So it doesn't matter your experience. I would love to hear more about it. And like I said, this is kind of one of the first videos in a series of videos I'm going to be doing on religious trauma and belief in general. So definitely keep an eye out for those things. Please ask me some questions about religious trauma, things that you're curious about, and I'll do my best to answer those in future videos as well. But in general, I'm just thankful for you being here. I'm thankful for you tuning into this content and watching a little bit. Make sure you leave a like and share this video if you think that it might be helpful for someone else. But until next time, I will see you later. Peace and love.